The next day, Elizabeth was out walking alone in the park. She saw Mr. Darcy coming toward her. Before she could avoid him, he came up to her and said, "I was hoping to see you, Elizabeth. Will you do me the honor of reading this letter?" When she took the letter, he bowed at the waist and turned away. The letter read, "Do not be alarmed, madam, on receiving this letter. It does not contain another offer of marriage. But I do ask your attention, and your sense of justice. You have charged me with 2 different offenses. One charge concerns your sister. The other concerns Mr. Wickham. I will answer the charge regarding your sister first. Soon after Bingley met your sister, I could tell he had serious feelings for her. Yet, although your sister seemed to like him, it seemed to me that her heart was not touched. If I was mistaken, I'm sorry I gave her pain. I did object to Bingley marrying your sister because of your family. I find no fault in the way you and Jane behave. But the behavior of your mother and your younger sister shows a total lack of propriety. To me, this is far worse than your family's lack of a fortune. Forgive me for saying this, it pains me to offend you." Bingley's sisters were also worried about their brother's attraction to Miss Bennet. "The 3 of us tried to persuade him not to marry Miss Bennet. This alone would not have discouraged him. His feelings were very strong. But we convinced him that your sister didn't really care for him. This wasn't difficult, as Bingley is a very modest man. There's one part of this affair that shames me. I knew your sister was in London, but I kept this fact from Bingley. At that time, I felt this was for the best. As for Mr. Wickham, I can answer this charge in only one way. You must know the entire truth of his connection to my family. Being very fond of Wickham, my father wished to provide him with a living when he died. Wickham told me he had decided not to join the clergy. By this time, I knew his character well. I agreed that he should not be a clergyman. Instead, he planned to become a lawyer. He asked for money, and I gave him £3,000. Instead of studying law, he spent it all on other things. Then, when the living became vacant, he demanded it for himself. This time, however, I refused to help him. His anger against me was strong indeed. I saw no more of Wickham until last summer. What happened at that time is painful for me to tell. I have no doubt of your secrecy in this matter. After the death of my father, Colonel Fitzwilliam and I were named guardians of Georgiana, my younger sister. She was living in London last summer with her governess, Mrs. Young. Unfortunately, we didn't know that Mrs. Young was a friend of Wickham. Without my knowledge, Wickham began to visit Georgiana. He convinced her that he was in love with her and persuaded her to elope. She was only 15 at the time, which must be her excuse. But she couldn't bear to hurt me, so she told me her plans. Luckily, I was able to stop the elopement before it took place. Wickham was caught, and Mrs. Young was fired. I am sure Wickham's chief object was my sister's fortune, which is £30,000. I believe he also wanted revenge on me. The revenge he planned would have been complete indeed. If you doubt what I am saying, you may ask Colonel Fitzwilliam. I will try to put this letter into your hands before he leaves. I will only add, God bless you. Fitzwilliam Darcy. At first, Elizabeth had a strong prejudice against everything Darcy said. His words showed nothing but pride. But then she came to the part about Mr. Wickham. She could hardly believe what she read. This cannot be. She said to herself. Mr. Darcy must be lying. She read the entire letter, and put it away. She decided she would never look at it again. Half a minute later, however, she read the letter again. She began to think about Wickham. She realized she'd known nothing of his past. She remembered his charming manner perfectly. Yet she could not recall anything good or kind he'd done. She decided against talking to Colonel Fitzwilliam. Darcy wouldn't have mentioned him if his story had been false. Wickham had said that he'd never slander Darcy, because he loved Darcy's father. But as soon as Darcy left for London, he told everyone his story. His slander, in fact, had destroyed Darcy's reputation. She remembered that people close to Darcy thought highly of him. Even Wickham had praised him as a devoted brother. As she thought it over, Elizabeth became ashamed of herself. She'd been blind and prejudiced about both men. Elizabeth read the first part of the letter again. She had to give Darcy credit for his observations of Jane. Although her feelings had been deep, Jane didn't show them. Now Elizabeth believed that Bingley had never known Jane was in London. Darcy's letter cleared Bingley of all blame. She felt heartsick at what Jane had lost. When Elizabeth reread the part about her family, she felt great shame. Her younger sisters were ignorant and foolish. Lydia would flirt with any officer in her sight, and Kitty followed wherever Lydia led. Her foolish mother only encouraged them by behaving just as poorly. And instead of correcting his daughters, her father made great sport of laughing at them. Now Elizabeth realized what her family's behavior had done. It had hurt both her and Jane's chances for marriage. She suddenly felt very depressed. A few days later, it was time to return home. Lady Catherine paid a last visit to the Collinses. The bossy woman gave them very detailed instructions how to pack. Maria felt that she must have done a very poor job the first time. She repacked her entire trunk. As Elizabeth said goodbye to Miss de Bourgh and Lady Catherine, she smiled. What if she had accepted Mr. Darcy? She wondered how Lady Catherine would have reacted. Elizabeth felt sad to leave Charlotte with such a husband as Mr. Collins. Yet she'd chosen him with her eyes open. And, for now, she seemed to be content. As they drove off, Maria exclaimed, "We have dined 9 times with Lady Catherine. I shall have so much to tell." Yes, and I shall have so much to keep secret, Elizabeth thought to herself.